If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be here, in Julian Vance's kitchen, watching him make coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world, I would have laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. Because a year ago, Julian Vance was a thundercloud on my horizon, a name spoken in hushed, reverent tones in the hallways of the firm. He was Mr. Vance, the boss, and I was Leo, a ghost in the machine, a man who translated his grand visions into precise, sterile lines on a screen. Our worlds weren't meant to overlap. Not like this. My life before him was a study in beige. It was routine, predictable. I woke at 6:30, drank my tea, and walked the 12 blocks to the office. I sat at my desk in the open-plan drafting pool, a sea of quiet clicks and muted coughs, and I drew. I drew buildings that would scrape the sky, homes that would hold families, spaces that would outlive us all. I loved the order of it. The certainty of a 90-degree angle, the clean finality of a finished blueprint. My world was lines and grids. It was safe. And then there was Julian. He was the opposite of a clean line. He was a chaotic scribble of energy and brilliance. He didn't walk into a room. He consumed it. His voice, a low baritone, could cut through the hum of 20 workstations. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that was always a little messy, as if he'd just run his hands through it in a fit of inspiration or frustration. He was, in a word, intimidating. From my desk, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the glass wall of his corner office. I watched him more than I should have. I watched him pace while on the phone, a caged panther plotting its next move. I watched him sketch furiously on tracing paper, his entire body coiled with concentration. I watched the way his brow furrowed, the way the muscles in his jaw clenched. He was a puzzle I studied from a great, unbridgeable distance. My attraction to him was a secret I kept locked in a box in the deepest part of my chest. It was a stupid, pointless ache, a low-grade fever that never quite broke. He was my boss. He was, as far as anyone knew, straight. And I was me, quiet, anxious Leo, who preferred the company of his drafting software to actual people. We were an impossible equation. The distance between us was measured in more than just the 50 feet of polished concrete floor. It was a chasm of hierarchy and personality. Our interactions were rare and brutally efficient. I need the revisions on the Miller proposal by noon. Leo, yes, Mr. Vance, this line weight is wrong. Fix it right away. Mr. Vance, he never used my name unless he was giving an order. I was a function, a tool he used to build his empire. And I accepted that. It was easier than wanting more. My solitude was a fortress I had built brick by brick. It kept me safe from the messy, unpredictable world of human connection. I had my apartment, my books, my quiet routines. It was a small kingdom, but it was mine. I thought it was enough. I had convinced myself it was all I needed. I had no idea how fragile its walls were. The disruption came on a Tuesday. It arrived in the form of an email from Julian sent to the entire firm. The subject line was just 2 words, the pinnacle. It was a competition. A career-defining contract to design the new skyline centerpiece for the city. The deadline was impossibly short. The stakes were impossibly high. A current of nervous energy shot through the office. It was all anyone talked about. I assumed I would be a minor player, cleaning up blueprints for the senior drafters. That was my role. But then, at 5 o'clock, as people were packing up, another email landed. This one was just for me. My office. Now my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. What had I done wrong? I scrolled through my recent projects, my mind racing, searching for the mistake that had finally gotten his full, undivided, and certainly angry attention. I walked the 50 feet to his door. Each step felt like a mile. The polished concrete seemed to stretch into infinity. I knocked, my hand trembling slightly. "Come in." He was standing by the window, looking out at the city that he so desperately wanted to reshape. He didn't turn around. His office was stark minimalist. A large black desk, 2 chairs, and a wall of bookshelves filled with architectural theory, and not much else. It smelled faintly of coffee and expensive paper. "Close the door," he said, his voice quiet but resonant. I did, the click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the silent room. My stomach was full of bees. He finally turned to face me. His eyes, a deep, stormy gray, pinned me in place. "The pinnacle," he said. It wasn't a question. "The submission is due Monday morning. I'm leading the design myself. I'll be working here all weekend. I need a drafter, one who is fast, precise, and doesn't ask stupid questions. My senior team is already buried." "That leaves you." I stared at him, speechless. "Me?" He wanted me? He must have seen the shock on my face, because his expression hardened. "Look, Leo, I don't have time to babysit. I need someone who can keep up. Can you do that? Or do I need to find someone else?" "I can do it," I heard myself say, the words sounding thin and reedy. "Good," he clipped. "Go home. Pack a bag. We start in 1 hour." He looked me up and down, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "And just so we're clear, this is about the work. Nothing else. No office politics, no drama, no feelings. We have one goal, to win this thing." "Understood." "Understood, Mr. Vance," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Call me Julian," he said, turning back to the window. "We're going to be spending the next 96 hours together. Formalities are inefficient." And just like that, the world tilted on its axis. I was no longer observing him from a distance. I had been pulled into his orbit, into the eye of the storm. The walls of my fortress were about to come crashing down. And most terrifying part, a small, treacherous part of me couldn't wait. That first night was a blur of caffeine and concentration. We worked in a strange, intense silence, broken only by Julian's clipped commands and the scratch of his pen on paper. I sat at a small workstation he'd set up next to his desk. My own world shrunk to the glowing rectangle of my monitor. But I was acutely aware of him, of his presence filling the room. The scent of his coffee, the soft rustle of his clothes as he moved, the low, frustrated sighs he'd let out when an idea wouldn't cooperate. He was a completely different person when he was designing. The arrogant, dismissive boss was gone, replaced by an artist lost in his craft. His focus was absolute. It was captivating. And being this close, I started to see the things you can't see from 50 feet away. I saw the faint, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a tiny flaw in his otherwise perfect, severe face. I saw the network of fine lines around his eyes, etched there by stress and sleepless nights. I noticed his hands. They weren't the smooth, manicured hands of an executive. His knuckles were slightly calloused, his nails short and clean. These were hands that knew how to work, how to build. Around midnight, he stood up and stretched, his back arching with a groan. The fabric of his shirt pulled taut across his shoulders, and for a split second, I forgot to breathe. He caught me looking. I dropped my gaze back to my screen, my face burning. I expected a sharp comment, a return to the cold hierarchy. Instead, he just said, "Food. We need food. What do you want?" "Anything is fine," I mumbled, not daring to look at him. "Don't be difficult, Leo." "What do you want?" he asked, his voice softer now, laced with exhaustion. "Pizza, I guess," I said. "No olives," he nodded, pulling out his phone. He ordered, and when the food arrived 20 minutes later, he opened the box and pushed the half with no olives toward me without a word. It was a small thing, a ridiculously small thing, but it felt monumental. He'd listened. He'd remembered. It was a crack in the armor, a glimpse of the man beneath the myth. We ate in silence, the only sound the soft chew of crust. It wasn't an awkward silence, though. It was a comfortable one, the kind of silence shared by two people focused on a common goal. For the first time, I felt less like his subordinate and more like a partner. It was a dangerous thought. We worked until 3 in the morning. My eyes were burning, my body thrumming with a nervous energy that was part caffeine, part proximity to him. He was hunched over a large blueprint spread across his desk, making annotations. I needed to check a measurement against his master copy. I stood and walked over, my movement stiff with fatigue. "I need to see the north elevation," I said, my voice rough. He didn't look up, just pointed a long finger at the corner of a sheet. "There." I leaned over the desk, my shoulder just inches from his. I could feel the heat radiating off him. I reached for the blueprint, my fingers tracing the line I needed to verify. At the exact same moment, he moved to adjust the paper. Our hands brushed. It wasn't a glancing touch. His fingers slid over the back of my hand, a brief, firm pressure. A jolt, hot and sharp as a lightning strike, shot at my arm. Every nerve ending in my body went on high alert. The air crackled. My breath hitched in my throat. I pulled my hand back like I'd been burned. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I risked a glance at him. He had frozen, his own hand still hovering over the blueprint. He slowly lifted his head, and his gray eyes met mine. The room was silent. The city lights outside seemed to dim. In his eyes, I saw not anger or annoyance, but a flicker of something else. Surprise, confusion, and something deeper, something that mirrored the electric shock I was still feeling. The moment stretched, taut, and fragile. It was a question hanging in the air between us. Then he blinked, and it was gone. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. He dropped his gaze back to the paper, his expression once again unreadable, closed off. "The measurement is correct," he said, his voice flat, all business. "Right," I managed to choke out. I retreated to my workstation, my whole body trembling. I sat down, but I couldn't focus. The feeling of his skin against mine was seared into my memory. A simple, accidental touch had changed everything. The invisible wall between us had been breached, and I had no idea what to do. He had said, "No feelings," but it was too late. My feelings were a tidal wave, and I was drowning. The second day bled into the second night. The atmosphere in the office was thick with unspoken tension. We moved around each other carefully, like two dancers who had forgotten the steps. We spoke only about the project, our words precise and professional, but underneath it all, the memory of that touch hummed between us. A live wire. I tried to ignore it. I tried to focus on the work, on the clean, logical world of lines and angles. But every time he moved into my peripheral vision, my focus shattered. I was so aware of him, it was a physical ache. I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for something to happen, something to break the spell. The break came from an unexpected place. It was almost 4 a.m. The city was asleep. A heavy rain had started to fall, lashing against the panoramic windows of Julian's office, isolating us even further from the world. We were both running on fumes, our minds frayed with exhaustion. And then the screen on my main monitor flickered and went black. "No," he whispered. I tapped the keyboard. Nothing. I jiggled the mouse. Nothing. My blood ran cold. The entire structural framework, hours and hours of meticulous work, was on that drive. "What is it?" Julian's voice was sharp from across the room. "The system crashed," I said, my voice tight with panic. It's not responding." He was by my side in an instant, leaning over me, his presence overwhelming. "Did you save the server?" "I was in the middle of a render," I said, my stomach twisting into a knot. "The last backup was an hour ago. We'll lose everything since then." An hour of his frantic, brilliant changes. An hour of my painstaking implementation. It felt like a lifetime. Julian swore a low, vicious sound. He ran a hand through his hair, his face a mask of fury and despair. "The central server won't have it. Not if the local file is corrupted. It would have been trying to sync. It could wipe the backup too." He straightened up, looking utterly defeated. In that moment, he wasn't the powerful, confident Julian Vance. He was just a man who saw his dream slipping through his fingers. He looked lost, and that's when the dynamic shifted. Because in this one specific technical area, I knew more than he did. "Wait," I said, a thought sparking in the fog of my panic. "There's a back-end recovery protocol. It's an old command line interface. Most people don't even know it's there. It might let me access the raw data cache." He looked at me, a glimmer of hope in his stormy eyes. "Can you do it?" "I can try," I said, "but I need you to be quiet. I need to concentrate." It was the first time I had ever given him an order. He just nodded, his jaw tight, and took a step back, giving me space. For the next hour, the roles were reversed. I was the one in command. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in strings of archaic code. The green text scrolled down the black screen. I was in my element, the panic replaced by a cold, clear focus. Julian stood behind me, silent and still. I could feel his gaze on my back, but it wasn't intimidating. It was trusting. He was trusting me to fix this, to save his project, his dream. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a file directory appeared on the screen. Got it. I breathed a wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy. I can rebuild the file from here. It'll take a few minutes. I started the process, my body slumping in my chair as the adrenaline began to fade. Leo, his voice was quiet, right behind me. I turned my head to look up at him. His face was just inches from mine. The anger was gone. The frustration was gone. All I saw was a raw, naked gratitude. And something else. Something that looked a lot like awe. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's my job." I mumbled, my heart starting to pound again for a completely different reason. "No," he said, his gaze intense. That was something else. He didn't move away. The rain beat against the glass. The low hum of the computer was the only sound. We were trapped in this bubble of intimacy, the rest of the world falling away. The power had shifted. I had saved the day. I had seen him vulnerable, and he had seen me competent. The carefully constructed distance between boss and employee had evaporated, leaving something raw and uncertain in its place. He was just a man. I was just a man. And we were alone, in the middle of the night, closer than we had ever been before. The rain was a constant, drumming heartbeat against the glass. The file finished rebuilding. The crisis was over. But the tension in the room had only coiled tighter. It was a different kind of tension now. Not the stress of a deadline, but the heavy, charged silence that precedes a storm. I swiveled my chair back to the monitor, pretending to check the integrity of the file. My hand was shaking. I could still feel him standing behind me, a warm, solid presence that made the hair on my neck stand up. I didn't know what to do, what to say, so I said nothing. "Leo," he said again, his voice low and rough. I closed my eyes. "Don't turn around. Just focus on the screen." But I did. I turned around slowly. He hadn't moved. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. It was a mix of exhaustion and something else, something vulnerable and questioning. "Why are you always so quiet?" he asked. It was the last thing I expected. "I'm a quiet person," I said, my voice barely audible. "No," he said, shaking his head slightly. "It's more than that. At the office, you make yourself invisible. I see you, but you don't let anyone else see you." Why? My throat felt tight. How could I explain it to him? The lifetime of feeling like I was on the outside looking in. The fear of taking up space, of being noticed, because being noticed often meant being hurt. "It's just easier," I finally managed. He took a step closer. The minimalist office suddenly felt impossibly small. "Easier than what?" he pressed, his gaze unwavering. "Then this," I whispered, the confession slipping out before I could stop it. Then, being seen, a look of understanding dawned on his face. He ran a hand over his jaw, the sound of the stubble rasping in the quiet room. "I get that," he said softly. "Everyone here sees Mr. Vance, the architect, the boss. They don't see the guy who hasn't had a decent night's sleep in a month, who is terrified this whole damn project is going to fall apart." His honesty was a gut punch. He was letting me see behind the curtain. The vulnerability I'd glimpsed earlier was now on full display. He was taking a risk. He was trusting me. "It's not going to fall apart," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of confidence. "It's brilliant. It's just a building," he said, a bitter edge to his voice. He looked away from me, toward the rain-streaked window and the city beyond. "Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it. The pressure, the isolation." He looked back at me, and his eyes were filled with a profound loneliness that I recognized all too well. It was the same loneliness that lived in the quiet corners of my own heart. I said no feelings. He murmured, more to himself than to me. "That was the rule. It was a stupid rule," I found myself saying, shocked at my own boldness. A small, sad smile touched his lips. "Yeah," he breathed. He took another step. He was right in front of me now. He lifted a hand, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was going to touch my face. Instead, his fingers brushed against the arm of my chair. Even that small contact sent a tremor through me. "I see you, Leo," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. I have for a while now. My breath caught. All the air left my lungs. The carefully constructed walls around my heart crumbled to dust. He saw me, the real me, the invisible man. He leaned in, slowly, cautiously. His gaze dropped to my lips. It was a question, a silent, terrifying, beautiful question. And I answered by not moving, by not breathing, by tilting my face up toward his. His lips met mine. It wasn't a passionate, demanding kiss. It was hesitant, tentative. It was a soft, searching pressure that was more honest than any kiss I'd ever imagined. It tasted of coffee and exhaustion and a loneliness so deep it felt like my own. I felt his hand come up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek, and I melted into the touch. I lifted my own hand, my fingers tangling in the soft fabric of his shirt. I kissed him back, pouring all the unspoken longing, all the secret, hopeless adoration of the past year into that one simple act. It was a confession. It was an answer. It was the beginning of something I didn't have a name for. When he finally pulled back, we just looked at each other, our breath mingling in the charged air. The rain had softened to a gentle patter. The storm had passed. A new, terrifying, and hopeful quiet had taken its place. I woke with a start. Sunlight, gray and diluted by the rain-washed windows, was streaming into the office. I was slumped in my chair, a stiff crick in my neck. For a disoriented moment, I didn't know where I was. Then it all came flooding back. The crash, the conversation, the kiss. My head snapped up. I looked around the room. I was alone. Julian's desk was clear. The stacks of tracing paper were gone, the blueprints neatly rolled and secured. A single sticky note was stuck to my monitor. My stomach plummeted. I reached for it with a trembling hand. For words were scrawled in his sharp, architectural script. Project submitted. Good work. That was it. No mention of what had happened. No, we need to talk, nothing. Just a professional, dismissive sign-off. The cold, familiar chill of Mr. Vance. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed its way up my throat. My mind started to spin, a vortex of self-recrimination. It was a mistake. A lapse in judgment brought on by exhaustion and stress. He regretted it. He was embarrassed. He was my boss, and I had kissed him. I was going to be fired. Of course, I was going to be fired. The no-feelings rule echoed in my head, mocking me. He had laid out the terms, and I had trampled all over them. I felt sick. The memory of the kiss, which had felt so honest and real just a few hours ago, now seemed sordid and shameful. A catastrophic error. I gathered my things, my movements numb and robotic. I walked out of his office, which now felt like a crime scene, and into the main drafting pool. The firm was empty, silent. It was Saturday morning. I walked the 12 blocks home, the city, noise a dull roar in my ears. I didn't see any of it. All I could see was the look on his face before he kissed me. Had I imagined it? Had I projected my own desperate longing onto him? My apartment, usually my sanctuary, felt like a cage. The silence was deafening. Every tick of the clock seemed to amplify his absence. I checked my phone 100 times. No calls. No texts. I opened my work email. Nothing. The silence was a physical weight pressing down on me, suffocating me. The rest of Saturday was a blur of anxiety. I paced my small living room. I tried to read, but the words swam in front of my eyes. I tried to watch a movie, but the plot wouldn't register. Every scenario I imagined ended with me being called into human resources on Monday morning. My career, the one thing I had, the one place I felt competent, was over. And for what? For a moment of impossible, foolish hope. Sunday was worse. The silence stretched on, becoming more and more menacing. My solitude, once a comfort, was now tainted. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was just empty. I could feel the space where he should have been. I had let him into my carefully ordered world, and now his absence had created a vacuum that was pulling everything apart. I replayed his words. I see you, Leo. Had he meant it? Or was it just a line, a moment of weakness he now bitterly regretted? The more the silence festered, the more I became convinced it was the latter. I was a fool, a naive, romantic fool who had mistaken a moment of shared stress for something more. By Sunday evening, I had resigned myself to the inevitable. I would go to work tomorrow, pack up my desk, and walk away. It would be humiliating, but it was better than waiting for the axe to fall. I sat on my sofa, staring at the blank wall, feeling a hollowness so profound it felt like a part of me had been carved out. The brief, brilliant flame of hope had been extinguished, leaving behind nothing but cold, gray ash. Then there was a knock on my door. My heart leaped into my throat. I never had visitors. Ever. I froze, listening. Another knock, firmer this time. My mind raced. Who could it be? Slowly, like a man walking to his own execution, I got up and went to the door. I looked through the peephole, and my world stopped turning. It was Julian. He stood in the hallway of my drab apartment building, looking completely out of place in his expensive coat. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes. He looked nervous. He ran a hand through his hair, the same gesture I'd seen 100 times from my desk. My hand trembled on the doorknob. My first instinct was to pretend I wasn't home, to hide, to retreat back into the safety of my fortress. But his rule, no feelings, had already been broken. My fortress was already in ruins. There was nothing left to hide behind. I took a deep breath, and I opened the door. He looked startled to see me, as if he hadn't actually expected me to answer. We just stood there for a moment, the silence of the hallway stretching between us. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The confident, articulate Julian Vance was at a loss for words. "Can I come in?" he finally asked, his voice low and strained. I just nodded, stepping back to let him pass. He walked into my small living room and stood in the center, looking around at my meticulously ordered books and the simple, functional furniture. He seemed like a giant in the small space. I closed the door, my heart hammering a frantic, unsteady rhythm. "I'm sorry," he said, turning to face me. "For the note. For just leaving. For the silence. I figured you regretted it," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. It was a defense mechanism. If I expected the worst, it wouldn't hurt as much. "No," he said quickly, shaking his head. "God, no. That's not it." He took a step toward me. "I didn't regret it. It's the only thing that's felt real in months. It scared the hell out of me." I stared at him, my carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. "You were scared." "Terrified," he admitted, his gray eyes searching my face. "Leo, my entire life is built on control, on planning, on knowing the outcome before I even begin. And then you. Nothing about this is controlled. I don't know the plan." And I panicked. I fell back on what I know. Work, deadlines, distance. He gestured vaguely with his hand. Mr. Vance showed up. It was an asshole move. I'm sorry, the sincerity in his voice was undeniable. A fragile tendril of hope began to unfurl in my chest. "The no feelings rule," I said quietly. "That was for me," he confessed, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I set that rule for myself. Because when you walked into my office on Friday, I already knew I was in trouble. I knew that working with you, being that close to you, it was a risk. A risk I told myself I couldn't take. Why?" I asked, needing to understand. He let out a long, weary breath. "Because my life is complicated. This job, it consumes everything. I don't have relationships, Leo. I have projects. I don't know how to do this." He gestured to the space between us. "To do it right. I was afraid I'd mess it up, that I'd hurt you." It was the most vulnerable I had ever seen him. The powerful architect was gone, replaced by a man who was just as scared and uncertain as I was. We were both standing on the edge of something new and terrifying, and he had just admitted he was afraid of falling. "You're not the only one who's scared, Julian," I said, and saying his name out loud in my own apartment felt both strange and perfectly right. He moved closer, closing the remaining distance between us. He reached out, not to kiss me, but to simply place his hand on my arm. The warmth of his touch seeped through my shirt, calming the frantic fluttering in my chest. "I don't want to mess this up," he said, his gaze intense and pleading. "I don't want silence between us ever again." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a single, solitary key on a plain, silver ring. He pressed into my palm. My fingers closed around the cool metal. "What is this?" I asked, my voice thick. "It's the key to my studio," he said. "The one at my house. For when we have to work late. Or when you just want to be there." He paused, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. It's not just about work anymore, Leo. I don't want it to be. It wasn't just a key. It was a promise, an invitation. It was a tangible symbol of him letting me in, not just to his office, but to his life. It was an act of commitment that spoke louder than any words could. The fear that had been my constant companion for the last 2 days finally, blessedly, receded. I looked down at the key in my hand, then back up at his face. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what I saw there. I saw a future. Our future. The weeks that followed were a quiet revelation. We moved slowly, cautiously, learning the rhythms of this new, shared life. The lines between boss and employee, between my apartment and his house, began to blur. More often than not, my evenings ended at his place, a stunning minimalist house he had designed himself, all glass and steel and warm wood. His home studio became my second office. I'd work there while he sketched beside me, the comfortable silence broken only by the scratch of his pen and the click of my mouse. We were a team in more ways than one. The work was still demanding, the deadlines still tight, but it was different now. It was our work, our dream. The real change happened in the small, in-between moments. It happened when I woke up in his bed, the morning light filtering through the massive windows, and found him already awake, just watching me. There was no anxiety, no fear of him being gone, just a quiet, settled peace. It happened in the kitchen, a space as clean and precise as one of his blueprints. I'm not a morning person, but I started looking forward to them. I'd find him there, making coffee, his back to me. I'd wrap my arms around his waist, resting my chin on his strong shoulder, and he would lean back into me, a soft, contented sigh escaping his lips. We didn't need to talk. The simple, domestic intimacy of it said everything. We share meals. We talked about everything and nothing. I learned about his childhood, about the father who taught him to build, about the loneliness of being the boy genius who never quite fit in. He learned about my quiet life, about my love for old books and my fear of crowds. He didn't try to change me. He just made space for me, folding me into his world until it became ours. One night, we were lying in bed, the lights of the city spread out like a blanket of fallen stars below us. You know, I said, tracing the faint scar on his eyebrow with my fingertip. I used to watch you from my desk. In your office. You were like a different species. Unreachable. He turned his head on the pillow, his gray eyes soft in the dim light. He captured my hand and brought it to his lips, kissing my knuckles. I knew, he said. I froze. You knew I was watching you? I knew you were there, he corrected gently. I always knew where you were. You were this quiet, steady presence in the middle of all the chaos. I look out of my office, and you'd be there, so focused. I think I was drawn to your calm. It was something I didn't have. The confession settled in my heart, a warm, glowing weight. He hadn't just seen me in those final hours of the Pinnacle project. He had been seeing me all along. My old life, the one of beige solitude and carefully managed routines, feels like a distant country now. I was so convinced that my fortress of loneliness was keeping me safe, but it was really just keeping me from living. Julian didn't just break down the walls. He walked through them and showed me that vulnerability wasn't a weakness. It was the only way to truly connect. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the chaotic scribble that brought color and life to my world of black and white lines. He taught me that taking a risk, being seen, and allowing yourself to feel was not just worth it, but the entire point. My name is Leo, and for the first time in my life, I am not invisible. I am seen. I am loved. And I am finally truly home.